They better not fuck me on the payment,
Goren thought, as he pulled his cloak closer against the upcoming cold wind and touched the weapons he had on his body. One knife, one hand axe, one crossbow, and a hidden dagger. It was a ritual, one he had learned from the frontiersman who had taught him much of what he knew today.
Always check your weapons before you set off,
They had told him. A good lesson, and one so many others seemed to have never learned. He spat on the ground, extended his hand, and touched a small lizard that hung dead on one of the thorns of a bramble. This he didn't like. It was a bad omen, he told himself, got up from his kneeling position and surveyed the area. This place here was wrong. His instincts already told him. Something about it was off, even though he couldn't pinpoint what exactly bothered him so much. The air temperature was normal, at least for this time of the year. It hadn't rained in a week, and snow was still a bit off. But something about it all still bothered him. Was it the man who had given him the job? Well, he hadn't looked very trustworthy, but Goren had his own ways of getting what was owed. Maybe that little frontier village he had just passed by. The people had looked thin and scared. No, he knew how bad times could be, especially at the outermost towns around here. All it took was one bad harvest, coupled with the disappearance of a few heads of livestock, to rattle a whole village. So, if it wasn't the weather, the towns, or the people, what was it that disturbed him? He really couldn't tell. Goren hummed and set off again, heading north to the place his now employer had told him to take a look at. According to him, there were rumors of a monster stalking these woods. Something big, dark, and dangerous. Goren had smiled as he'd heard these words. It hadn't been the first time someone had offered him money to hunt some monster, only for it to turn out that it had been nothing but a bear or a small pack of wolves. Well, he always did the job he got hired for and then demanded his rightful payment. Sometimes with a little bit of force, if the person was obstinate. This time wouldn't be much different, he told himself. His hand found the quiver hanging from his belt at his side. 12 bolts, enough for even a mid-sized pack of wolves. With his knapsack slung over his shoulder and the rations he had with him, he would be able to spend almost a month out here before having to return. Enough time to find and kill whatever animal was out there frightening the surrounding frontier villages. Yet, somehow, Goren still felt uneasy about it all. Maybe the reason was that, this time, he had almost believed the people telling him of that monster. They had looked serious and sober, which definitely was something out of the ordinary. Usually, the people who told the stories were either drunk or on the verge of some madness, embellishing every detail to lessen their own shame. But not this time. He had talked to quite a few men and women, and they all had seemed terrified by the monster in the woods, while admitting how much it scared them. Goren grumbled, pulled his cloak in closer, and started walking up the small hill heading north. The wind was slowly picking up, making it feel like the temperature was dropping as well. Maybe the first snow was just around the corner, Goren thought, and corrected his earlier assumption in his mind. It didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Whatever it was, whether a bear, a wolf, or something else, it would be just as easy to kill in fall as it was in winter. He had hunted things for years and had never come across anything that could escape him. A bear in hibernation was even easier to kill than one that was walking around, he thought while grimacing and pulling the tip of his hood down to protect his ears. He remembered heated discussions he had had with some young but wealthy people. "Where is the honor?" they had asked him. Goren spat on the ground in disgust. Right now, just as he had done back then. What good was honor during a hunt? Hunger and cold were far more pressing matters than something like honor. The only people who could talk about it like that were the ones who already knew where their next few meals would be coming from. He hated them. All of them. Goren stopped for a moment to take a deep breath and calm himself down. It was important that he kept his emotions in check. Getting angry would mean he might miss something. And out here, any mistake could mean one's death. He touched the knife, the hand axe, the crossbow, and the hidden dagger again, and felt himself calming down. His heartbeat was slowing, his lungs expanded, and his thoughts returned to the matter at hand. Out here, there were too many tracks for him to single out the one the so-called monster should have left behind. People had brought the animals to this hill to let them feed. If he wanted to know what exactly he was hunting, he would need to leave the last town behind completely, and hope the thing had taken a path close to his. He nodded at himself, walked on, and finally managed to get to the crest of the hill. The area around him was breathtaking. Behind was civilization, small dirt roads, houses and homes, but in front there was nothing but wilderness. Forests, rivers, mountains. Looking at them, he knew exactly why people were afraid of the unknown outside their homes. No one could know what happened out there. There could be wild animals, monsters, or even strange humans living just half a day away from the frontier settlements, and no one would be any the wiser. With the stress of having to endure out here, year after year, it was no wonder people imagined strange creatures coming after them and their families either. Everyone out here was already fighting for their lives, and if thinking up some kind of corporeal enemy could help them withstand all the bullshit trials nature threw at them, all the better. He was one of the few who really profited from such superstitions, even if he didn't like them at all. No one would promise him as much money for a pack of wolves as they would offer him to get rid of a Wendigo. The more fear people had, the better his payout. He looked due north and suddenly felt a chill beneath his cloak. There was an area sticking out from the green of the woods surrounding this position, one he hadn't noticed before. It was in the right direction, not even half a day's march away, and Goren felt this strange unease again as he looked at it. The trees over there were dead. All of them. It stuck out to him immediately. The sight seemed to touch something in him, some kind of sixth sense he had developed during his many years as a hunter. It was a bad place, one of the people who had taught him would have said. One he should avoid. Goren grimaced again and started walking down the other side of the hill. He couldn't avoid it. It was where his next pay was coming from. There was no doubt in his mind that that spot would lead him to the thing he was hunting. The cold wind got stronger again, and even though the sun was slowly rising, it felt like the temperature was dropping. What had the people of the villages lost to the monster? For now, a few sheep, a dog, and one child had disappeared, though no one was sure they hadn't simply run away. It didn't sound like much, but Goren had only gathered those stories from one of the towns. There were more in the area, and he could very well imagine the others having suffered misfortune too. Some people in his profession would go from town to town, trying to get more money for the same job, but he wouldn't stoop that low. The men and women of the frontier were interconnected, and they liked to talk. A bad reputation could follow one for many miles and years. Once a hunter was branded as either unreliable or disingenuous, people would avoid them. Goren himself had known some who had turned to banditry after ruining their reputation one way or another. It wasn't like the people in his profession could do much of anything else anyway. Yes, there were companies always looking for frontiersmen, but to many, that was even worse than robbing folk on the roads. He just hoped he'd never get into a position where he had to make a choice like that. Goren watched the tracks on the ground and could finally see them getting more and more sparse. He thought he could make out some paws, but wasn't completely sure if they were from wolves or one of the dogs the shepherds around here kept. If it was the former, it would be one, maybe two, wandering the area. Not much of a threat at all. An easy payday, Goren thought, and immediately felt doubts creeping up. It just couldn't be, he knew. The people around here were aware of wolves. Hell, there were at least a few normal hunters among them who had experience hunting them. 2 wolves wouldn't terrify the whole area. He walked on, still keeping his eyes to the ground to follow the tracks. His instincts told him that those paw prints weren't from dogs, but on the other hand, he also felt that they weren't the culprits either. Maybe 2 wolves had just passed by here yesterday? Sometimes they could be very inquisitive, especially the younger ones in the packs. Their turning up here wouldn't be a surprise either, or even mean they had to have tried to kill livestock. There were plenty of small animals outside such villages that a wolf could easily hunt. Goren continued following the paw prints and could finally make out 2 distinctly different sets. 2 wolves walking side by side. The tracks were leading in the exact same direction he had been heading in anyway. So, there was no harm in keeping a close eye on them, he thought. If they were part of a bigger pack, it could also solve the mystery of the monster. Goren followed them without letting them out of his sight. He could read tracks very well, thanks to years of experience. It was one of the absolute essentials in his line of work. If one couldn't read tracks, one couldn't hunt. Easy as that. Goren stopped suddenly as he noticed a change in the paw prints. There were blood splatters on the ground and dirt, but no other tracks leading toward them or away. He looked on. One of the sets of prints disappeared by the bloodstains. The other turned around and around before starting to sprint due north. He ran after them. Goren could already see a pretty clear picture of what had happened. The 2 wolves had been walking side by side at a leisurely pace before suddenly something had hit them. Not a bolt, no. There was no sign of the first wolf collapsing on the spot or even taking another step. It had just vanished. Alarm bells were ringing in his mind. Something had attacked them, and it hadn't done so from the ground, which meant he could feel an ice-cold chill running through his body. The single set of tracks went on and on. It had sprinted along. He could almost feel the fear emanating from the paw prints. Goren continued following them until suddenly there was another set of blood splatters on the ground before the tracks again disappeared. He looked back the way he had come. Judging by the distance, there couldn't have passed more than maybe 30 seconds between the first and second kill. He looked around. There was no sign of the bodies. Goren suddenly felt cold. Something had hunted the wolves, and it had taken them on easily. He looked at the ground more closely. There were blood splatters all around, but no sign of the body falling over. Whatever had done this had taken them away. Goren touched his knife, hand axe, and a crossbow. He needed to calm down. He knew. Maybe there really was a monster around here. Well, he couldn't go back and tell them he wouldn't do the job now, right? They had told him that there was, and he had agreed to hunt it. Running back and telling them that he had thought there wouldn't really be a monster, but he would have still kept the money if it had only turned out to be wolves, would make him look like a fraud. Goren grumbled while his mind was racing. He had given his word that he would check it out. He still had a dozen bolts for his crossbow. That should be enough to kill whatever this thing was, right? He hadn't seen any animal yet that could simply shrug off a bolt, and if he actually managed to bring it down, whatever it was, he could use its corpse to make even more money. Maybe enough to get out of this line of work. Goren felt the heat rising inside his body. He hadn't felt like this in years. This tension, back when he had been but a boy and had hunted a wolf for the first time on his own, that's when he had last felt like this. As long as he stayed sharp, he would get through this, he promised himself. Yes, there was no reason to run away. He was a hunter, and a damn good one at that. As long as he was prepared, there wasn't an animal around that he couldn't bring down. A small cloud escaped his mouth into the almost freezing air as he tried getting the cold out of his extremities. He had to stay sharp and be ready. Goren looked around again and found a trail of blood leading north. It was only in drops, and not many at that, but it showed him where this thing had fled to. The woods. Probably that strange dead zone, he thought. Goren pulled in his cloak and started jogging. Judging from the way those wolves had died, staying out in the open was a bad idea around here. It had snatched him up, he thought. The second one mid-sprint. He looked up and around, but could see nothing flying above. Goren felt the tension getting even more intense. At least he now knew what to look out for. Whatever this thing was, if he managed to find it before it could see him, this would turn into a normal hunt. All he had to do now was reach the trees. Goren sped up even more. His feet flew over the cold ground, the moss, stones, and grass. It didn't feel like a standard hunt, though. The tension was constricting his chest, and he was acutely aware of the way the crossbow and quiver were moving and poking him at each step. An ever so slight tremor was running through his fingers, which had nothing to do with the temperature out here. He was on edge. Well, it was to be expected. After all, he was hunting something he had never seen before. Goren finally could see the trees getting close, ducked, and almost jumped into the darkness. He felt safer here. If he saw something above, he could easily hide beneath one of the trees, and if he heard anything, the trunks would give him cover as well. Goren gave himself a few seconds to catch his breath again, before slowly unclipping the crossbow, putting his boot into the cocking stirrup, and pulling back the string. It wasn't the best weapon, he knew. It was just something he had bought a few years back, and the wear and tear on the weapon was obvious. But it still did its job. The woods around him were rather thick, which meant firing his crossbow would be difficult. But since he wasn't hunting a pack of wolves, it should be manageable. As long as he only had to concentrate on a single target, he would be okay. Goren told himself to calm his nerves, and pulled out a bolt and put it into the groove. With his weapon now loaded, he felt a bit better. Goren ducked and started sneaking through the woods. He made sure to not step on the myriad of fallen twigs or the soft and wet patches littering the forest floor. It was something he had learned early, and well. There couldn't be any unnecessary noises during a hunt, no matter what one was after that day. That was also why he didn't touch any alcohol. He had seen old hunters, once great men, stumble around like fools, drawing attention and frightening away their prey because they either were drunk or had been the night before. It was amateurish and even dangerous. The first band of frontiersmen he had been with had lost one of their own because he had gone on a hunt, still drunk, and had encountered a bear. Goren himself had been there when they had found his remains. A torn mess of flesh, blood, and clothing. He had sworn to himself that day that he wouldn't end up like that. If he ever were to fall to one of the animals he was hunting, it wouldn't be because he had become careless. Goren wiped the cold sweat from his brow as he continued on. The woods around him seemed strange. They weren't as lively as they should be, he thought. He couldn't see a single track on the ground, neither from deer, nor rabbits, nor the like. There were patches of moss and small plants everywhere, a sign that nothing had grazed on the forest floor around here for weeks. He didn't like it. Yes, there was a frontier village not too far off, which meant that hunters could prowl the area from time to time, but they wouldn't have completely exterminated the deer population around here. Right? That would be madness. No. Goren took his left hand and touched the knife, hand axe, and dagger again. The ritual still steadied his nerves. Suddenly, the wind turned and a breeze hit him from the front. His legs froze in place and his heart almost skipped a beat. Different smells hit his nose, and for a moment he was acutely aware of every single drop of sweat on his body. The odors were ones he knew very well. Bad ones. Rot, entrails, blood, and bile. It was rushing toward him with an intensity he had never seen before. Like a cloud of death, it covered the whole area. And suddenly, Goren knew why the woods around here felt so empty and off. The stench. It made his body shiver. Fear was what he felt from smelling it. Something bad, downright evil was lurking here. Every single instinct in his mind howled. Things had died in the area. Many living beings. Goren held the crossbow tight and took a step forward. His legs were shaking, but he didn't let that stop him. If he could smell the thing, that meant that it wouldn't be able to smell him. His weapon was loaded and ready. Running away was out of the question. He took another step, then one more. The stench seemed to only grow more intense. You could smell old, long-dried blood and new. Fresh kills and rotten ones. He sped up, but still trying to remain as quiet as possible. If this thing was here, running away now could draw its attention, he warned himself again. This monster's territory was just up ahead. He had gotten too close already. Goren rounded a shrub, then heard it for the first time. A sound that wasn't coming from the wind. A sickening crunch, followed by the breaking of a bone. Something was feeding up front. Goren swallowed and tried to take a shallow breath. The stench was on his tongue. He could taste it, but didn't dare spend even a moment thinking about it too closely. His whole attention was on what was happening up front. Another crunching sound reached his ears, and Goren sped up his steps. He could see the line where the forest turned from green to completely dead ahead. The thing would be there, just as he had imagined. His heart was racing and he was out of breath. But Goren forced his hands to stay steady. The first moment when he saw his prey was the instant the outcome of the hunt would be decided. If he managed to give off a perfect shot, it would be done then and there. If he missed, he didn't even want to think about it. Goren lowered his body even more as he snuck forward and heard another crunch. Bones were breaking and rotten flesh was splitting apart. The sound alone was disgusting. He reached the last of the living trees, pressed his shoulder against the trunk, and then looked out. The sight took his breath away. All the trees in front of him were dead. There was not a single leaf or needle still remaining on their branches. But that didn't mean the trees were empty. To the contrary. Goren thought back to the small lizard he had seen on the thorn of a bramble not even an hour ago. A shrike must have done this. Those birds always stuck their dead prey onto thorns to keep them away from other predators. And this thing here had done the same. Only its prey was bigger. Goren felt his confidence waver as his eyes looked from one dead body to the next. Rabbits, deer, sheep, and even a wolf. They were all impaled on the dead and leafless trees. The stench they were giving off was even worse up close. But the worst thing yet was the figure mounted on top of an empty fur maybe 20 paces from him. Its clothing was torn, almost shredded. The tip of the trunk went into its back and came out of its chest. Goren could see a knife on its belt, and its dead and rotten eyes seemed to stare into eternity. He felt his hand shaking, then heard another crunch. All his instincts screamed at him to turn and run away. This thing was far, far worse than anything he had ever seen before. Goren turned his head to look behind and froze. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see something moving. It was holding onto the trunk of another fir, with two giant bird-like legs. Its body was massive. Black and brown plumage covered it from its tip to its tail. He turned his head to look at it just as the beak went up again and tore another piece of the carrion in the tree. A giant bird, but one he had never seen before. Then Goren noticed its eye. It was black as coal and cruel. He could feel it at that moment. The thing had noticed him as well. His arm lifted the crossbow as the monster suddenly stopped with a torn-off leg in its beak. It was looking at him, waiting for him to flee. He felt it, but wouldn't do this thing a favor. Goren moved slowly, almost imperceptibly. The crossbow raised up, and his head came down. He didn't need to aim carefully. There was no time for it. But he really needed to make this shot count. There was no doubt in his mind that there wouldn't be a second. His trembling finger touched the small lever. The monster still holding onto the tree seemed to shiver. Its feathers rubbed over each other. Goren breathed out, then pulled the trigger. The bowstring sang as the bolt shot forward. He heard it cutting through the air and saw it flying toward the giant bird, which suddenly shifted. Two black legs with claws pushed it upwards along the tree. The bald head disappeared in its plumage. Goren heard a soft thud, followed by a terrible scream. The crossbow fell from his grasp as he lifted his hands to protect his ears. It sounded like it wanted to pierce his eardrums. He staggered as his legs seemed to wobble and give way. A shadow fell over him. Goren noticed it, pulled his hands from his ringing ears, and suddenly got taken off his feet. The impact was hard enough to press all the air out of his lungs as 2 feet coiled around his left arm and yanked him off the ground. He could feel sharp claws piercing through his clothing down into his flesh. Red-hot pain flooded his mind as he looked up and saw the thing staring back down at him. Goren couldn't form a coherent thought. His mind went blank, but his body still reacted. He felt the handle of the hand axe in his palm, then heard it as it cut through the air. One of the black legs of the monster split down its center, and the thing screeched again and let go. Goren felt himself falling, tucked in his chin, and suddenly hit the ground with a thud. He rolled over again and again as the scream of the monster seemed to get quieter and quieter, getting replaced by a loud ringing in his ears. His left arm felt like it was on fire. Blood was gushing from wounds in his flesh, but his instincts told him to get up immediately. The shadow was overhead. He came to a stop and jumped, still unsteady on his legs, just as the monster swooped down again. There was blood dripping from its leg. Goren screamed, but couldn't hear his own voice anymore. He saw it coming toward him, its talons spread out to grab hold of him. The crossbow was gone, as was the axe. He pulled the knife out with his right hand and felt the impact the next moment in his chest. The bird ripped him from his feet again, its claws grabbing both his shoulders. Goren stabbed a knife into the leg, but the blade simply slid over the thick, rough skin. He felt the talons plunging into his back, tearing his muscles. His mouth was open. He was howling in pain as it yanked him up. Again and again he tried to stab the creature, but the knife couldn't penetrate its skin. Goren felt himself getting pulled up and already knew where this journey would end. His howl turned into a screech as he hammered the knife against the leg, then lost his grip and watched it slip and fall from his grasp. The monster flew up a tree. The world seemed to spin around him, and all he could concentrate on was that black eye staring down at him. It felt like pure hate flowing from the thing was seeping into him. He knew what it would do. It couldn't do anything against it. His fist hit a talon holding onto his right shoulder. His left arm, torn and bleeding, raised, and he pushed his fingers into the monster's gaping wound on its leg. The giant bird opened its beak in a silent scream, then suddenly swooped down with him, and Goren felt a pain he had never thought possible before. Something hard and cold pierced his hip as the monster impaled him onto the broken tip of the tree. He cried out, yet couldn't hear his own voice anymore. The weight on him was crushing as it pushed the wooden spike deeper and deeper, and he felt his legs going numb. He bit his tongue, and the blood washed away the gruesome smell. The talons finally disappeared as the monster let go of him. Goren looked down to see the tip of the tree sticking out of his hip. He was fainting, he knew. The giant bird still looked at him. It pulled back its head, then shot forward with the beak. Goren hardly felt any pain as it pierced his left shoulder. He couldn't think at all anymore. It was a struggle to even stay conscious, but the sight of the black eye now so close to him made his blood boil. He would die here, he knew. There was no way for him to survive. But this thing, this monster, he couldn't let it live. A hidden dagger, his last weapon, was in his right hand. He could feel the black feathers against him, their almost wood-like texture. The thing still had its beak in his shoulder. It was so close. Goren screamed as his upper body turned and twisted, and he rammed his right hand into the side of its neck. The dagger wasn't very long, but it should be enough. He felt it slipping in between the feathers, piercing the monster's skin, and could see the eye of the thing twitching as it understood what he had done just now. It pulled its head back and away, but it was already too late. Blood shot out of the wound on its neck. It lifted off and flapped its wings. Goren could see it, trying to regain balance. It was throwing its head side to side. The wound on its neck was losing too much blood. He knew it from experience. Its beak was open, it was crying out, yet he couldn't hear a single thing. All he felt was the warmth leaving his body. His legs were completely numb, and that numbness was spreading. The bird above him still flapped its wings in a panic. He could see it trying to gain height, then its left side jerking. It went into a tailspin, one it couldn't possibly return from. With an open beak, it shivered mid-flap before it fell like a bolt, striking the earth beside the tree. Goren felt the impact through the wood. The dagger left his grasp. He felt the life draining out of him. The thing down there was probably screaming. He didn't mind. All around him, animals were stuck to the trees, just like him. Revulsion gripped him, but he couldn't even lift his head anymore. It was cold. So cold. Goren's vision blurred. He blinked and could see another dead person on a tree close by. The corpse looked young. Too young. He groaned, unable to even hear it. His life was ending. He knew. But at least he would be the last victim of this monster. People would come here sooner or later, and he just hoped that they would burn this place to the ground. They had to make sure there couldn't be any offspring. Goren felt his pulse slowing down. Coldness disappeared and numbness overtook him.
What a joke,
he thought, as the light finally left his eyes.